Good morning. Good morning. And welcome to the Unitarian Congregation of Taos and our fifth Sunday program. My name is Julian Spalding and I'm a member. Thank you all for coming. Please silence your cell phones. From its founding nearly 20 years ago, UCOT has been creative about Sunday programs. One of our purposes in Months with Fifth Sundays is to offer programs to reach out beyond our congregation to our community. The Unitarian Fifth Sunday programs are usually 2 to 3 a year and are developed from topics suggested by members with a focus on local and regional issues. Our purpose is to learn from active community members about particular issues, and they have the programs open to all through public announcements and our website. The Fifth Sunday Committee, which right now is me and Gail, would like to invite topic ideas for congregational members and community program attendees for future programs. And we're also open to somebody else joining the committee. If you feel so called, I'd love to have you. The Unitarian Congregation of Taos is a theologically diverse, liberal religious community open to all who are in accord with our values of equality, compassion, and the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. If you are a guest today, we welcome you. If you'd like to donate to the congregation, there's a basket on the back table. I want to welcome today's speaker, Joe Mazza, who will speak on hospice care. Joe is a UCOT member and longtime hospice employee. Joe has been involved with hospice care for several years as a community educator, executive director, and a spiritual care and grief support coordinator. He will be presenting on the many supportive aspects of the Medicare Part-A hospice benefit and will address the myths and misconceptions regarding hospice care. In his experience, the Medicare Part-A hospice benefit is sadly underutilized in access later rather than sooner, preventing the recipient and family members from receiving the full scope of supportive services offered by the benefit. Joe.
All right. Thank you, Julian. It's kind of different being introduced in your own congregation. But I want to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to open, if it's cool with you guys, with prayer and an intention, if you want to call it that. So, to God and universe, divine love, and consciousness, may we have ears to hear, eyes to see, open hearts and minds to receive all that we need to hear, see, and receive. Grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be everywhere. Amen. Well, again, thank you all for coming. You are very brave souls. And I say that semi-jokingly because when I used to give presentations many years ago, and I would put a flyer together explaining what I was going to talk about, I never used the word hospice. Because I'd put something like, come here, this incredible Medicare Part-A benefit that is very rarely used. Because they wouldn't come. And so when they would come and they'd sit down, I said, well, today I'm going to talk about hospice. And so I blocked the doors. And you cannot leave until I'm ready. Well, they thought that was funny, of course. And they mostly were very happy that they did come and listen, because they felt like it was really important information. So I started in hospice care in 2003 as what was called an admissions counselor. And so my prime responsibility was to, after receiving a referral that for the hospice company I work for, I'd go and visit the patient or caregiver wherever they were. Many times there's a hospital bed, home, could be an assisted living, skilled nursing facility. But I'd go visit them and I would explain to them the hospice care and also the Medicare Part-A hospice benefit. So in a 2-year period, I enrolled a little over 300 people in the hospice. So I had a lot of experience talking about hospice and explaining hospice care. So then I moved on to become the manager or executive director of a hospice in Tucson, Arizona, where I was involved in the day-to-day operations of a hospice company. And there I would onboard new employees, and I had what was called Hospice 101. And I explained to them about the hospice benefit and the care that was provided as a company, because many of these new employees had no idea about hospice or had the same misconceptions about hospice. Then I moved on to Monterey, California, worked there for 4 years doing the same thing. Back about 3 years ago, I started with 2 hospice companies here in Taos as their spiritual care coordinator and bereavement coordinator. And the reason I could do that is because I have a background. One of my many past lives was a full-time non-denominational pastor/minister. So it was kind of cool that I was able to combine my hospice experience and knowledge with the spiritual care piece and support those folks on hospice. But right now I'm not working for anybody, so open for employment. No, But over those years, a really common theme and thread that has carried all this time, unfortunately, is that, as Julian said, the hospice piece of Medicare Part-A is vastly underutilized, still vastly underutilized. And when it is accessed, it's accessed much later than it could have been. And it really robs folks of all the benefits that can happen. So my job is to inform you and help you if the time comes to make some informed decisions or ask some informed questions of maybe a primary care provider. Because honestly, I believe that the primary care provider will support you, but they will probably not initiate the conversation. And so you need to kind of know if you're facing some type of an end-of-life situation or have a loved one, that you kind of know what questions to ask and what your options are. Because it's all about quality of life. Amen? So, you've got to ask if the procedures that you're suggesting or the path you're asking me to take, what is my quality of life going to be in the next few months? And is it worth it? So if you don't know what your options are, then you really are not able to ask those questions. So it's really, really, really important. Let's see. So what is hospice care? A lot of misinformation about hospice care. But I'm going to break it down as simple as possible. It's really not that complicated, but it is simply put another level of care. So it's a level of care. It's on the continuum of care. And it is a level of comfort care for any individual who is facing a life-limiting illness. And that care is delivered to that person wherever they call home. That is a life-limiting illness. Well, that's a kinder, gentler term for terminal. Does anybody know what the definition of terminal is in regard to hospice care?
6 months diagnosis.
Prognosis, yes. So the way the verbiage reads with the Medicare guidelines is, if the disease runs its normal course, the life expectancy of that person is 6 months or less. Now, I like to pull 2 words out of that statement, if and normal. And I call those variables. And it's important that you understand their variables because it does make a difference on length of stay and that type of thing when you're in the hospice. So if the disease runs its normal course, the life expectancy of that person is 6 months or less. So that is the only criteria to make one eligible for hospice. It's prognosis, not diagnosis. And that's another misnomer, or not misnomer, but misconception that you have to have a certain type of illness or disease, or you have to be a certain age. Yeah. If the disease runs its normal course, your life expectancy is 6 months or less, then you are eligible for hospice care. All right? Now, one of the things I forgot to mention over those years of giving presentations and meeting with people, not only is a common thread about it being underutilized, access later than sooner, was a comment that was made, I can't tell you how many times, either by the patient or primary caregiver. Why did nobody tell me about this sooner? Or why did I not access this sooner? Because once the care came in, they're like, OMG, this is amazing. But unfortunately, in many of those cases, their loved one lived maybe 2 weeks or less. That's really typical. And when they come on board 2 weeks or less, it becomes crisis management. And it is tough on the patient, on the primary caregiver, and on the hospice provider. You are scrambling to get those symptoms under managed. And they miss out on the full scope of what is available, which I'm going to refer to on the whiteboard. And by the way, the whiteboard is more for reference sake than for you to actually read it. It's more for my reference. Keep me on track. So how many people here have Medicare Part-A? Got that little red, white, and blue card? Okay, if you're 65 or older, you generally automatically going to be on Medicare Part-A. The reason I talk about it relating to Medicare Part-A is because 90% of folks who do access hospice care, they access it through their Medicare Part-A benefit. But Medicaid has a hospice benefit. TRICARE, if you're a retired military person, has a Medicare benefit. The VA has a Medicare benefit. And they all follow the same guidelines that if the disease runs its normal course, the life expectancy is 6 months or less. But since most folks have Medicare Part A, I talk about it from that perspective. Also, before this presentation, how many of you knew from your the Medicare Part A that you had a hospice benefit? Okay, so more today than when I used to first present. In a room of, say, 10, maybe 2 would raise their hand. So it's getting better. It's getting better. Okay, so I hope everybody, can you see that okay? Okay, good. It's kind of shiny there. So I call this the Medicare Part A pie. Very appropriate for fall. And it does simplicate Medicare Part A, but essentially Medicare Part A, it has 4 components to it. The one that we're probably mostly familiar with, hospitalization, skilled nursing facility, home health care, and hospice. Now, the hospital piece, the skilled nursing piece, the home health piece are all curative in nature. They provide curative measures for the patient. And they all have their limitations. You know, in hospitalization, depending on what the illness is, you know you can't stay in the hospital forever, right? And they're very quick to try to get you out. And they're going to pay something out of pocket. Depending if you have a Medicare Advantage plan or traditional Medicare, you're still going to pay something out of pocket. Skilled nursing facility, this is generally for folks that maybe have had some type of surgery, a knee replacement, shoulder replacement, maybe had a stroke. They cannot go home to be cared for. And so they go into a skilled nursing facility to receive some type of rehab, physical therapy, that type of thing. But once again, it's limited. It's 100 days per incident. And then you got to get out if you don't meet the baseline, even if you don't meet the baseline. And there's someone that I know of, he has since passed away, that was a member of our congregation. And that happened to him. He was in the hospital, in the skilled nursing facility under some condition, and he met his 100 days and he had to go home. And then, thank goodness, he went on to hospice. But also, out-of-pocket co-pays is going to happen. Under home health care, it's a little bit similar to skilled nursing. You're at home, you're recovering from some kind of a injury or surgery, and they do come there, and the physical therapist may come, the occupational therapist may come, a nurse may come. They may even have a CNA, certified nursing assistant, come to help with dating. But once again, it's limited. You can't be on it forever. And it also is going to cost you something out of pocket. And again, they're all curative in nature. Well, when you swing to hospice, remember, it's about comfort care. Things change dramatically. And so hospice has a holistic approach to it, like none of the other levels of care. I call it holistic support. And I do want to make something clear, because this is also a misunderstanding, even when it's explained to folks when they come on to hospice, that hospice care and the team that comes with it is there to supplement and support the primary caregiver. It is not to replace them. All right? So we'll have folks say, well, why are you in there more often? And we need somebody 24/7, but that is not what hospice is about. So I want to make that really clear. It's a support, I call it a safety net for the primary caregiver and the patient. But it's holistic in its support, and it addresses the physical, the psychosocial or emotional, and the spiritual part of the patient and the family. I mean, don't you think that's pretty cool? From a government funded insurance. Holistic. So when they wrote this, became a law in 1982. A Medicare, they became part of Medicare, not a law. And so that's 42 years ago. So those folks were really forward thinking back then, whoever put that together. So you get this group of folks, I call them the interdisciplinary group, and it consists of a medical doctor or a DO. It could be a physician's assistant, nurse practitioner, registered nurse, LPN, CNA. And those folks are the ones that come in and take care of the physical, medical, clinical piece of hospice care. Then you have a medical social worker who's part of this. And they come and take care of what we call the emotional or psychosocial piece. And they can do anything from helping you put a living will together, helping you with funeral arrangements. I can't tell you how many families we went to go see that didn't have any kind of living will, no end-of-life directive, no power of attorney, no funeral home picked. And these are folks that, I mean, they weren't like 15 years old. I mean, they were 80, 85, 90, and they didn't have these things in place. Or they didn't have a way to get sufficient meals, so the medical social worker could get meals on wheels on board. So there's so many things that they can do to help you out. They can also help you apply for long-term Medicaid waiver if for some reason you can't be at home alone. So that's another wonderful piece. Then you have a chaplain. I really never have liked that word chaplain. I always think of it as either military or prison. I'm a chaplain, this is you, unfortunately. So I never called myself a chaplain. I said I'm a spiritual care support person. And so you're there, again, to address, and every one of these folks has to do an initial assessment as to what the needs of that patient and family are. And then based on that, they develop a plan of care. But they're there to help and meet that person wherever they're at in their spiritual journey. And also there to support the family, primary caregiver. Another piece that none of the other levels of care have is the bereavement piece. Another word for grief support. And so this always blew me away. First of all, that there was that. You can come in, the bereavement person can come into the situation right from the get-go, do what they call anticipatory grief support for not only the patient but the family. But then when the patient passes away, they are on board to help out up to 13 months after the patient passes. That's incredible.
really.
And then last but not least, is the volunteer portion. Every hospice has to have a volunteer piece to their interdisciplinary group. And depending on the hospice and the volunteers, it can vary what they can do. But I've been with hospices that the volunteers can offer massage therapy, Reiki, art therapy, music therapy, companionship. And so these are called core services. Every hospice has to offer these core services or they cannot be operated. All right? So that's pretty cool, right? Well, now, even better, well, maybe not better, that is the cost piece. Under hospice, those core services, all this stuff I just mentioned, are offered to the patient and family at no cost to them. Zero. Any equipment that the hospice company says determines that that patient needs for their comfort, hospital bed, oxygen, walker, wheelchair, bedside commode, shower bench, nebulizer, no cost to the patient. Hoyer lift. Some of these folks maybe don't know what Hoyer lift is, but very expensive piece of equipment. Any supplies that patient needs that the hospice provider feels they must have, like incontinence supplies, nebulizer supplies, they are free of cost to the patient. And then any medications that the hospice provider determines that patient needs to keep them comfortable, to manage their symptoms, provided at no cost. So isn't that amazing? An amazing benefit. But people are afraid. Again, somebody mentioned someone didn't attend today because they don't want to hear about it. Insurance or hospice. Well, I'm not old enough. Buddy, death and illness, don't care.
Maybe they're not going to die.
Or they may never die. Well, the true self doesn't die, but this physical thing does. But again, that's a very typical attitude. And we also discussed this, and nothing about sexism, because I'm a male, but men tend to be the ones who don't want to talk about that. Deal with that kind of stuff. I got to tell you a story. Well, I got some stories, but this one. So this was in Prescott. This is when I was the admissions counselor, and we got the referral called to this house to speak with this Hispanic gentleman. His wife was pulling her hair out because he just wouldn't want to talk about hospice, and I forgot what his diagnosis was. But it was beginning to become more and more difficult for her to care for him. So I went in there and sat down with him, and of course, you know, he had his arms crossed and that whole body posture thing. And I come from Trinidad, Colorado, so I grew up with a Hispanic population. Both my best friends, so I didn't mean anything to me. So we got to talking, and after all these questions, it finally came down to the fact that he said, well, I'm not going to go on hospice if I can't drive. I said, well, where did you hear that? Well, I was told that I can't drive if I'm on hospice. Well, what he was confused about is home health care. You have to be homebound to qualify for home health care. So there's this fine line. I said, sir, you can drive just as long as you're safe. And don't kill people. And that's all it took. And he said, I want to come on. And thank God he did, because his condition continued to deteriorate, and his wife really benefited from the help that we were able to bring him. But it was just that attitude and a misunderstanding of hospice. All right. Oh, and I wanted this to be really informal and interactive, and I forgot about that. So if you guys have questions, if it's something I'm going to present later on, which I don't think I already did, but go ahead, what's your question?
There are all these push ads to change from Medicare to Medicare Advantage. Does Medicare Advantage allow all this?
So the question was, or the statement was, there's a push to move from traditional Medicare to Medicare Advantage. And the question is does Medicare Advantage have the hospice component? Yes. They have,
All those?
yes, ma'am. If they're gonna be reimbursed by Medicare, they have to. It is a Medicare, so they're still part of Medicare Part-A, it's just not what they call the traditional Medicare Part-A. And some of the other folks, you know, if you have traditional Medicare Part-A, then you have to get a supplement, and you have to get your prescription piece. But regardless, if you have Medicare Part-A, in any plan, they have to provide that. Yes, Pete.
You're probably gonna cover this, but what if you don't die in 6 months?
Oh, man, you're right, I was just ready to jump into that one. So, oh, I'm sorry. What happens if you don't die in 6 months? Hallelujah. Well, it's very, very possible you're not gonna die in 6 months. So I've got down here my little chart, benefit period. Now this is gonna really blow you away, if you haven't been blown away already. So when somebody first comes on to hospice, they enter what is called an initial 90-day benefit period. So they meet the criteria, and there goes the phone. Well, thank you, Pastor. But thank you for coming. Really.
I'm drawing attention.
So you enter into an initial 90-day benefit period. You've met the eligibility requirements. You start on hospice care, and you're going along that first 90 days. And then, if you're still alive by the end of that first 90 days, then you have to be recertified. And so it's incumbent on the hospice provider to prove that you still meet that initial requirement of if the disease runs its normal course, your life expectancy is 6 months or less. So if that happens, you're still alive, you go into the second 90-day benefit period. There's your 6 months. Well, what happens is after the end of this 90 days, you're still alive. And it happens. Believe it or not, people actually get better. But they still meet the requirement, okay, the criteria. So they have to be reevaluated again and determine if they still meet it. And if they do, are you ready for this? They enter into an indefinite number of 60-day benefit period. But at the end of each 60 days, they have to be recertified. They have to meet the criteria. Indefinite. They don't boot you out. Now, what happens if you get better and you no longer meet that eligibility criteria? Well, you come off in whatever benefit period you're in. Your discharge, again, the hospice has to prove to Medicare that you need it. Otherwise, you know, Medicare can hold back dollars. I've seen it. Big time. So you got to have your documentation right. Everything's got to be right. But if you don't meet it anymore, then you're discharged off of hospice. And that's it. Too bad, so sad. No, I'm kidding. Well, what happens if you get sick again, or the disease comes back, or something happens? Guess what? If you meet the criteria, you can come right back on. You just come back on in the next benefit period.
So you go back into the 90 days?
No. Well, if say you came out of this 90 days, then you come back into this 90 days. Let's say you came out of this 90 days and you go into the next benefit period.
And does the hospice worker have any responsibility to keep this evaluation process going?
No. So the question was, do they keep that evaluation period going? No. Once you're discharged.
Oh no, I mean while you're.
Oh yeah. Yes. Oh yeah. Every visit. Oh my God, the notes. And it's not just the nurse, the spiritual care person, the medical social worker. They all have to chart to the diagnosis and prognosis. They have to prove that you are declining in that time frame. But if you're not, and you come off and you're discharged because you don't need it, and you actually got better, you're not disqualified or, I was going to say disciplined, that's not the right word, but penalized for that, and so you can come right back on the hospice as long as you meet their criteria. Now, what happens if, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to ask if you ever run into situations where you're disqualified, really for no taking caretakers.
Well, you know, that's a really good question. He wanted to know if anybody's ever been disqualified because of the poor note-taking of the caregivers. No, I'll tell you who gets penalized. The hospice. They will withhold payment until they get it right. You cannot discharge a patient off the hospice because you screwed up. Yeah. So what happens if you decide you don't want to be on hospice anymore? You can. Believe it or not, you really can. Let's say you want to pursue some curative treatments. You can do that. And you're not penalized and you're not cast aside. You just revoke your hospice benefit. And then if after all that happens and you're like, you know what, it didn't work, or you're still in that, if the disease runs its normal course, you can come back onto hospice. So you're not locked in and you're not locked out. It's just an amazing benefit.
I'm not sure about terminology, but is all hospice at their facility?
Okay, so the question was, is all hospice at their facility? Remember, hospice is primarily 90% delivered to a person wherever they call home. So it could be an assisted living facility if that is your home. If you're on long-term care, Medicare, Medicaid waiver, you live at the Taos Health Center, that's your home. We would come to you. Let's say you were on assisted living over there at whatever it's called these days, Enchanted Village. We would come there. It's your private residence in a motel room. We've taken care of people in motel rooms. The hospice that I was a part of when I first joined, right before I became an employee of them, they had just finished taking care of a homeless guy under a bridge. So, wherever you call home, wherever you call home.
Did the homeless guy have insurance?
I don't remember, but you know what? I should say, the hospices I've been associated with have never denied care because of inability to pay. But I'm not saying everyone's like that. Yes?
Is there a place for people who don't have a disease diagnosis that may have become incompetent?
Well, yeah, that's not hospice related. It can eventually be, but that's a real common thing happening these days as we boomers get older. Just a little statistic. Folks that are 85 and above, 50% of them will get Alzheimer's. But that's a whole different ballgame. So that has nothing to do with hospice, unless they became hospice qualified. They met the criteria. Some folks do come on because they're not eating anymore, because of the dementia and things like that. But
to answer her, there's palliative care.
Well, I guess I don't. Do you mean, is there a facility that somebody can go?
No, I mean, if you have a stroke and couldn't manage.
Oh, yeah. So that's a good question. Well, a stroke, the results of a stroke can put you in that terminal illness. The issue there is that it's still, the goal is most folks would like to be at home and taken care of. But if they don't have anybody, then that is really where the social worker can come in, and at least in New Mexico, try to get that person enrolled on the state's Medicaid long-term waiver so that they can go to a place like Taos Health Center and live there and be cared for there. So there is that, but it takes time. And New Mexico, as you well know, is not a very rich state. And if you've ever tried to apply for long-term care Medicaid waiver, it takes a while. Yeah, Chuck.
So that goes back to what I was questioning, I think, in my mind. It's, you kept using the term illness or disease. So something has to be diagnosed.
Yes. Yeah, there has to be a diagnosis associated with the prognosis. And so when somebody comes on the hospice, they have to assign And it's based on the medical records, on whatever is going on, whatever makes the most sense, whatever seems to be the thing that is putting that person on that downward trend.
But also I've heard that if you go into, the emergency room automatically.
That's another good, so he said, what happens if you're on hospice and you go to the emergency room? Well, when you're on hospice, you are really, it's suggested highly that you don't do that, and that you call your hospice nurse first. But people panic. We were taught 911, right? So what happened, and unfortunately, because what happens when they go into ER, they go from here to here. And so Medicaid isn't going to Medicare's not going to double pay. So they have to revoke the benefit and go on their regular Medicare hospitalization piece. But they could be discharged home and could be re-enrolled in hospice care. It's just, it's not a mess as much as it's just another, you got to go through all the assessments, everything else. Sally, did you have a question?
Well, okay, so someone in hospice is at home.
Mhm.
About how many hours a day does one get help?
That's a good question. So if somebody's at hospice at home, how many hours a day do they get help? Well, when the nursing assessment is done, then it's determined at that point how much nursing care that person needs. And so a plan of care is developed, and it depends on the condition. There is no minimum, or there is a minimum. There has to be a nursing visit done at least once every 2 weeks. But there's no maximum number of visits, either from the nurse, the staff. Most cases, depending on the condition and what's happening in the home, I'd say a CNA or a nursing assistant will come in twice a week to help with bathing and that kind of thing. It's kind of a normal line of care. Spiritual care person may come in once a month, once a week. Medical social worker thing. So it really depends on what's happening in that person's home.
So there's this big assumption that the person who needs hospice care has a care network of family, friends, that sort of thing.
I wouldn't call it an assumption. It's, you determine that when you go into the home, when you get the referral, to find out exactly what is the caregiving situation there. If there's none, well then the plan goes to, well, there are a couple of things. Medical social worker is going to immediately get involved and try to get that person on Medicaid, because then they can possibly go into the skilled facility and live there. There are private paid caregivers here in the area. They would give that loved one or whatever, the caregiver, a list of who, and then they would have to pay for someone to come into the home and take care of that person as much as possible. But in most cases, there is some sort of family system or neighbor support system. And on those rare occasions when you don't have that, then
I don't have that.
yeah. Well, it doesn't hurt to maybe, this is why it's good to be in a situation, in this kind of a setting, because something to think about down the road. What happens if I have, who can I talk to? Can I put a plan together? Better to start planning now when you can, then, yeah, and that's good. I'm glad you're here, because those are the things that folks don't really think about before they're in that situation and it's too late. Yes.
So I'm thinking about how does this or mesh or not mesh with long-term care insurance?
Yeah, that's outside my scope of understanding. No, seriously, it is. I don't know about that. That usually pays for long-term care, room and board, but it doesn't have anything to do with your hospice. Because not everybody can afford to live in a facility.
Did you just say that in-home caregiving is covered?
No. If you need a situation like Kristen was talking about, where there is no one, you can hire somebody, but it would be out of pocket to come in however many hours a week. Now, see, Medicaid has a program, and there's a long-term care waiver where they can assign you so many hours, and you can hire somebody privately, and Medicaid will pay for Medicare Part-A will. Medicaid will.
Also, then what about
And the VA has in-home health, it's got a program too, but under Medicare Part-A, which is kind of what we're primarily talking about, they won't cover that.
what is the transition from Medicare to Part-A?
Well, there is only,
The person needs that, and the team decides that you move from Medicare to Medicaid.
it's a process. You have to apply through the state of New Mexico for a Medicaid long-term care waiver to get the Medicaid piece. Yeah. You have to, well, not for normal Medicaid. They have a different structure of what you can afford or what your assets and finances are for the long-term care waiver. But I don't want to, that's a whole different, you'd have to have somebody come in and talk about all that. So I'm just trying to stick with Medicare Part-A, and not go off the rails here.
So does JCAH monitor hospice as they do home health, or is that a different?
They can, you can apply for that certification, and then yes, they will, but not normally.
Okay.
And that's
Who
a
does monitor them?
Medicare, they have, I'm telling you, when they get those, the billing from Medicare, from the hospice company, and you have to pay so much, they want to know that person really does qualify. Yes?
I just wanted to share my own personal experience, and I'd like to touch on death doulas and medical aid and dying.
Well, now I'm going to talk about medical aid and dying, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry?
I am going to talk about medical aid and dying.
Okay.
And maybe we can hold that for later, please, because I do have someone that I wanted to introduce to you that wants to give her story as an adult child of a parent who had a terminal illness, and the struggles and challenges as family, and also maybe some influences you may have had. So Nikki Schuler is here with us today. And Nikki, you can, and you don't have to use the pulpit if you don't want to, the lectern. I'm going to turn this on and speak into it, dear, like it's a ice cream cone.
Just to touch upon what she was asking, like, so in my mother's case, she had supplemental insurance that actually helped with all of that, like paid for travel, reimbursement for hotel, and for food. But that was above and beyond what her insurance through the state of Kansas did. It was actually another entity or another insurance thing that she and my father took out many years ago when my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. So there are some options out there. So I guess I'll first start off with my first experience with hospice was when my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. Actually, I think almost Joe, like when hospice first came in. So I was 10. And I just remembered that, gosh, really hospice to me is embodied human angels on earth. And my grandmother's team would come in, and all of our family, like my mom, my aunt, my grandfather's faces just were so relieved. And my grandmother would smile. That was about the only time she would smile, because she knew she was going to get some relief and be, pain-free. And it was just amazing. That was my first. My second was with my mom, who was diagnosed with cancer in 2013. And we were so, as far as my mom was concerned, we were so privileged because my mom had such excellent insurance. She was 62 when she was diagnosed. And again, like I said, she also has supplemental insurance above the state of Kansas. She worked for Hays State University. And it was amazing. So through that, because she had amazing insurance and supplemental insurance, she got the best care at Anschutz in Denver, Colorado. She went through 3 drug trials, which prolonged her life and gave her very, very, very good quality of life for 6 years. But over the course of these 6 years and the drug trials, she was in and out of hospice care because, she would, go through one drug trial and it was great, but then, what are you going to do next? And the cancer comes back. So our amazing angel team for my mother, her name is Jody, and we today are still really good friends. And Jody, she was available to my mother, to us, night, day, anytime. And I can't tell you how thankful we were for her. Because with every course of treatment that my mother received was, again, like new set of questions, new set of emotions. It wasn't, every trial that she was on wasn't like the previous one. So it was all new again. And Jody had the answers for us. And sometimes we didn't want to hear, what she had to say. But she really guided us, and her whole team guided us through this 6 years, until, my mom's journey, was at an end. And Jody knew when to call home so that we could all be with my mom. And it was so beautiful. And even when my mother passed, she was still there for us. Again, like just like helping us through, arrangements. And because even though it's coming, and my mom, she had her own plan. Like she wanted a celebration of life, and she was going to be cremated. She was very much in charge of the end of her journey. But we still, didn't know, there's all these questions, and Jody was there to help us. Still, like Joseph, even, months, years beyond. So my mother passed away in 2019, and I still talk to Jody and a few of the other nurses that were part of my mom's team, still to this day. So it's incredible, the aftercare. Yeah. So, and then lastly, we lost my aunt in January of this year. She had aggressive uterine cancer. My husband and I were in the hospital for a week over Christmas with my aunt. She did attempt some treatment, but it was just so aggressive that she couldn't take it anymore. And Christmas Day, she wanted to enter into hospice care, and it was like night and day for her. Carrie, the director there in Wichita, came to her, and it was like the flip of a switch. All the care just changed, and my aunt received, I guess, pain management. They kept her pain under control, and it wasn't, up until during the course of her treatments, her pain was never managed until she entered into hospice care. They arranged for a 3-hour, very delicate ride transport back to her home, and so that she could stay in her home and be with her family and friends and her animals. And they helped my uncle prepare a room in the house, and they provided everything. So it is incredible. And, cancer, whatever illnesses, it just doesn't discriminate. So it doesn't matter how old you are or young you are. You just gotta get care. So anyway, that's my share.
So can I ask, so your mom at times went through periods of being disqualified and then would re-enter it, so it's kind of back and
Correct.
forth.
So just what Joe said, and once she entered, then and she would start so she went through 3 drug trials. The first one, well, she wasn't in the hospice care then, but after the second drug trial, she did, because even though she was doing really well, she still was never cancer-free. So she, again, she entered into hospice care, and then she would try another drug trial, and so then she would exit out and then go back in, but it kept up, yeah.
So the flow was still good.
Oh, the flow was amazing, that's why I said, Jody, she handles everything. So.
You got to remember, not all hospices are the same. They have to provide the same core services, but not all hospices are going to give exactly the same kind of care. And that is why you have to be just like a consumer for anything else. If the time comes or the situation that you ask questions like that, you ask, what is your on-call service like? What happens if 2 in the morning, I don't know what to do and my loved one's in pain? How quickly do you respond? What are your volunteers like? What is it that they do? Those are really, really important questions and things. So you should, and I'll get back to you. I don't want to forget about you, but I do want to very quickly, because I want to be also aware of the time, and I'm kind of a stickler for time. So there was a question or a comment about the medical aid in dying piece. So I don't know if you all knew that, so in effective June 18th of 2021, the Elizabeth Whitefield End of Life Options Act became a law. And here in New Mexico, this is just New Mexico. We were at the time, I think, the 11th state in the United States to have a medical aid in dying component. So these are, who's eligible? An adult? That's interesting. No, I mean, I see some of the stuff I didn't really know. You gotta be terminally ill, given a prognosis of 6 months or less to live, mentally capable of making their own healthcare decisions. In addition, a person must meet the following requirements: a resident of New Mexico, acting voluntarily, and capable of self-administering the aid in dying medication. So you have to be able to administer it. They cannot administer it for you. So it's basically given 2 ways, orally or rectally. So if you cannot swallow, then you can take it rectally, and a plunger is involved in that, and you have to be able to push the plunger or suck the solution through a straw. And also, not all hospices support the medical aid in dying option.
How long does that process take?
It varies per person. It varies. It could be 15 minutes to 4 hours. Yeah. Well, it's pretty quick. It's supposed to be. It's a solution of 5 very heavy-duty medications. I witnessed 2 of them, and they were both very different. And both folks were in different situations with their illness, but they wanted to have a say on when they die. So that was really important to them. And the nice thing about both of those situations is they got to say goodbye to their family. In one situation, the gentleman had a I call it the last supper, Jeff's last supper with his family. And he invited us, and we all had barbecue and sake. And then he took the solution.
You don't have to have the cooperation of your primary caregiver.
Not if you're on hospice. And that's another reason to be on hospice if you are thinking of that, because if you're not on hospice, you then have to have the signature of 2 medical doctors. And I don't even understand really how they get the meds to you. But in New Mexico, anyway, at least through hospice, the meds are never sent to the house. They're sent to the hospice, and the hospice brings them over. And they're always constantly asking you if this is really what you want to do. Now, you said something about, I know you want to talk about death doula. That's a
I have several comments I wanted to make, and I know we're running out of time now. But I just want to say one thing is the local Amboy Hospice does not do medical aid in dying.
Right.
The other 2 hospices do.
Right.
Another good question to ask when you're, looking for a hospice is, do you provide a death doula? Because I know Red Willow does, and in my experience, my husband was on hospice care the last 10 hours of his life.
Wow.
And there was not a death doula available. So the 2 hours it took to be admitted into hospice care in our home, they left, and I was alone with my husband the next 8 hours. And I would have loved to have had somebody there with me. My husband was fine with just me being there, but I would have liked somebody. And to your question about how long does it take, it's a minimum of 3 days, and that's really rushing it, to get all the paperwork in order for medical aid in dying, because the hospice doctor has to be there. I guess it's normally 2 weeks, but in an emergency situation, it can be 3 days. My husband only had hours to live, and we have been members of Compassionate Choices for 25 years, and had all of our advance directives, all of that done. But my husband died from a bowel obstruction, so things were going very quickly. He went into he had been on palliative care. We were thinking about hospice, but we were waiting for that terminal diagnosis of cancer, which he just got 7 days before he died. And then a couple days after that, he had to go to the emergency room. And I would just like to share the information that with our local hospital, the maximum amount of time you can be an inpatient is 3 days, period. My husband was actively dying when they pushed him out the door. He was conscious, but he was throwing up bile from his bowel obstruction. And the IV medication he was getting in the hospital was more effective than the pills I was giving him while he was dying. So he had a very rough exit.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So I can just reiterate, when you go on hospice, it is, and there's just hours left. It is a crisis situation. And this has been 15 months ago that my husband died. I spent that first year basically just dealing with the trauma of it all, you know. And, the other thing I wanted to share is medical aid in dying costs $500 in cash because Medicare does not pay for that.
Medical what?
Medical aid in dying.
Medical aid in dying, it is, you do have to out of pocket it. Again, I don't know that it's I know one hospice, I think they have, they help with that, and it costs the patient $250. So that's something else you can be talking to the hospice about. So there's a lot to cover. We can't always be covered, and I barely just touched the tip of it. But I am available. My contact information, most of you know, but here's my phone number, my email. I'd be more than happy to meet one-on-one or with your family members, maybe to help navigate some situations you're facing. Of course, I wouldn't charge you anything. It's just important that you do have support and at least maybe be pointed in the right direction. I could also probably hook you up with someone who can help with, if you are thinking about getting on the Medicaid long-term care, getting that waiver, there's a process, it takes a long time. But we can also look at that. If you're a veteran, it's called Veterans Aid and Attendance, can point you in the right direction on that one as well. So thank you all so very, very, very much for being here, for being brave to come. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Julian. This is it. This is it. Okay. Well, thank you again, and God bless and keep all of you.
Thank you.
Amen. Bye-bye.
I'm not gonna lose these instructions. Oh! Some of that. Okay, so, I'm not sure how to train them. Does anyone know how to turn this off? Oh, yeah, and then yeah.